what we're going to do now is open up for some Q&A. So there's a couple ways you can do that. First, you can use the chat option, or else you can actually raise your hand, and we will get to you and unmute your microphone and let you ask a question to all three of the panelists. But I'm going to start one with a two-part question that came in from Meg Dean Franco. And I think I'll have Sarah answer the first part and Desa answer the second part. So the first part of the question is, what can the Denver Foundation do to help connect donor advised funds with each other to leverage donations to common areas of interest? And Desa, we're going to have you answer after that. How can you help us to identify nonprofits that are doing really innovative things to help respond or rebuild specific sectors after this crisis? So if each of you could take a minute to talk about, first, Sarah, how we can help in different ways that we can help people leverage donations.
Thank you, Alyssa, and thanks, Meg, for the great questions. So we are in regular touch with a lot of you who are letting us know what you're interested in, what you're concerned about, and how you'd like to connect. And so when you have questions, contact us, contact your relationship manager or any of us, and we are working to connect you to nonprofits and to each other. We also are keeping people updated through our regular updates to the community, which I think are shared on social media and also in our emails. But what we find is we'll put out information that we have, that we've learned, difference that we're making, grants that are happening, and people will respond to that. We can connect you up there to leverage gifts that way.
Hi, Desa.
Hi.
Sorry. Real quick.
I was like, are you unmuting me? Am I unmuting me?
Yeah, we're unmuting each other at the same time, but maybe, Desa, could you talk about some innovations you've seen of nonprofits that are sort of changing how they're operating that's really impressed your team?
You know, I would say one thing that is really unique about the Denver Foundation is that we have an opportunity to work with organizations that might not be the usual suspects. I don't know if folks are aware of our Strengthening Neighborhoods program, but it's an opportunity for groups that aren't actually even 501c3s. To apply to the Denver Foundation about great ideas that they have to improve their neighborhoods. And what we see come out of that program and several others that we have available is that organizations will actually form and grow. And the Denver Foundation is kind of at the front end of being responsible for supporting organizations that might not otherwise receive foundation support just by the nature of who we are, and we're able to work with them over those periods of time. So I think, you know, we love getting questions from donors about organizations that might be interesting, might be innovative, might be entrepreneurial, because it gives us a chance to highlight those groups that we work with on a regular basis. So for example, one group that we're working with right now and made an investment in recently is the Colorado Community Wealth Building Network. It's a kind of emerging organization that's working with small businesses and entrepreneurs. It's providing counseling support, it's providing financial support, and it's a group that you might not think of. You might think of the SBA or, you know, other organizations that are working with small businesses. This is really working with those kind of grassroots, in some cases with immigrants and others that need support that might not have another place to go. So I think the Denver Foundation is a wealth of information about organizations that might not otherwise rise to the top, but are doing really amazing work, particularly with those most vulnerable populations.
Great, thanks, Desa. Javier, I'm going to go back to one of the questions that was asked earlier. Could you go into a little bit more detail about how you in particular are communicating with other foundations locally, as well as on a national level about community foundations and the role that they are playing in response to COVID.
There have been a number of video calls on the local side to gather the local community foundations and other foundations here to talk about what each of us is doing and how we can collaborate. You know, for example, with the folks at Community First, they've been very clear that if there's anything in Jeffco that we receive in terms of a request for funding through this current RFP process that we have out for the Critical Needs Fund, that we're going to be unable to support, to make them aware of it, because they might be in a position to support that group. And that's just one small example of everything that's happening every single day with regards to collaboration in the philanthropic sector here locally and across the state. And then nationally, you know, the first person I heard from when all of this started was Tony Mestres, who's the CEO of the Seattle Foundation, a good friend. And as we all know, this is the community that first really experienced COVID-19 in a pretty dramatic way. So they had to leap into action immediately with no playbook. Well, Tony and his team at the Seattle Foundation created a playbook. And within just a couple of days of the news breaking, he was sharing that playbook with many of us around the country so that we could start to prepare, knowing full well that all of us would need a playbook. Recently, on the local funder side, we had a conversation about potentially setting up a nonprofit loan. Since Seattle has become the new epicenter, as we all know, has set up just such a mechanism to help nonprofits in their community. So I immediately reached out to Lori Slutsky, who's the CEO of the New York Community Trust and also a friend, and she, again, gave me the playbook on how they accomplish that and who their partners are. And it's something that we're looking at locally, potentially. But again, all these things just allow for shortcuts that allow us to really spring into action in a very nimble way, in a quick way, as required by a crisis that is so devastating and is not giving us a whole lot of time to do strategic planning around it. The Council on Foundations has also been a tremendous resource and has pulled together a number of convenings virtually to talk about this and to understand what community foundations in particular are doing around the country. And you know, one that I participated in recently was really enlightening for me, because every single community foundation on the call was doing different things. And again, that's the power of a community foundation. You need to respond according to what the needs of your community are. And so even though, yeah, we can develop playbooks in one area, you have to then adjust that playbook to your community and make sure that you're deploying your resources in the way that is most effective for you. So yeah, there's a tremendous robust network locally and nationally on this, and everybody's pulling together in a really meaningful way.
Great, thanks, Javier. We got another question from Naveen. I'm going to send this to Desa. The question is, are there smaller 501c3 organizations you think are falling between the cracks, or specific vulnerable groups, for example, homeless populations, immigrant women, etc., that are in need?
Yeah, yes. I think what we're seeing is that almost every nonprofit organization is being dramatically impacted by this crisis. And we're hearing from organization after organization after organization, whether they're doing work directly related to COVID and are seeing an increase in their need for services, or there are organizations who are seeing their revenues go down because they can't offer trainings, they can't do fundraising events. We're seeing a tremendous impact all across the nonprofit sector. And so we're trying to support groups, right, that that are in that space. You know, in the education arena, I didn't talk a lot about that. You know, supporting Faith Bridge, which is a group of congregations who are providing school supplies and food and, you know, computers and digital support to kids. You know, small organization doing great work. You know, so there's lots of groups that are on the ground in every arena that are being impacted. And the vulnerable populations that you identify are exactly right, along with lots of others. And, you know, it's important, I think, to take a look at, you know, at populations that are broadly impacted. So, you know, women experiencing domestic violence, but we're also supporting Latina Safe House, which is focused specifically on Latinx women who are experiencing domestic violence. And so, you know, people experiencing homelessness, people experiencing food insecurity, youth and children, seniors and older adults that Javier mentioned earlier, you know, kids who are at school, not at school right now, with special needs. You know, there's just a myriad of people who have been vulnerable across time, and whose vulnerability is increased even more during this period. You know, I think about immigrant populations and the many groups that we're supporting to help them navigate. The Center for Health Progress is working with federally qualified health centers and other community safety net clinics to make sure that that immigrants are able to access health care and health resources, because people who are undocumented get COVID as well. And so, you know, it's those kinds of things that are really heart-wrenching and really powerful in this space.
I believe Javier had a little something to add to that question.
Thanks, Alyssa. Just to reiterate something that I know Sarah and her team have also been sharing with donors, which is to think about your favorite nonprofits who are canceling events right now. Obviously, fundraising events cannot occur. For many organizations throughout Colorado, this is maybe their one big opportunity to bring in the resources necessary to run their operations year-round. If you know of an organization like that, we would encourage you to send a donation anyway, even if the gala is called off. And then think about organizations like the Denver Performing Arts Center as an example. They've not just had to cancel fundraising events, they've had to cancel literally everything that they do, which is the way that they are able to maintain their business operation. One that is crucial to the cultural health and well-being of this community. So think about those organizations that are really hurting due to this and due to the inability of them to bring in the resources that they're going to need throughout this crisis, but frankly, far beyond it.
Great, thanks, Javier. I wanted to point out that on Friday we sent out to the entire our entire nonprofit network information about the CARES Act benefit. Some of you may be familiar with that. That was passed by Congress that allows small businesses, including nonprofits, to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program. And so we are encouraging folks because, you know, every nonprofit, just like every small business, is feeling this. Sarah, could you talk a little bit about some of the donor incentives that are aligned with the nonprofit, or sorry, with the CARES Act?
Absolutely, thank you, Alyssa. I did allude to a few of those before. First and foremost, everyone is able to donate $300 and write it off above the line, regardless of whether you itemize or not. And the idea there is everybody can give a gift or multiple gifts up to 300 that will count in this work against COVID, but also will be helpful to you at tax time. Also, the corporate filers are able to deduct up to 25% of adjusted gross income versus the 10% where it was. For us individual filers, the limit has gone from 60% to 100% for contributions this year. So where there was talk in the past about some of the disincentives for charitable giving, we know people are generous, and we know people respond with all of their time, talent, treasure, and testimony. But now there's additional incentive to make these gifts in 2020. And again, I think I mentioned these gifts have to go to things like the Critical Needs Fund or organizations doing services and business in the nonprofit community. These added incentives don't apply to gifts to private foundations, donor advised funds, and so forth. The idea is to mobilize the philanthropy and get it out this year.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. We've got a few more questions. I actually am going to go ahead and take the first one from Chelsea. Following an earlier question, can you name now or in a call a list of the groups that you were just describing, helping women and families, families of color, women in shelters, out of work, etc. The Denver Foundation is keeping a very active list of COVID resources. If you visit our website, it's denverfoundation.org/COVID. And you can see each time we make a wave of grants, we publish information about them, including links to those nonprofit organizations. So that is the best place to look. We're also doing a regular constant contact email out to our groups to keep them updated. But that COVID page on our website, which is available both in English and in Spanish, is kept up to date. With that, I'm going to ask Desa to talk just for a second about how this next round of Critical Needs Fund is going through an application rather than directed by the foundation, why we decided to do that, and the information available and the types of nonprofits that you'd encourage to access it.
Sure. So we, as I mentioned, had pulled together a set of organizations that we felt, were kind of in the middle and were serving as umbrella organizations to many, many other smaller organizations across the state. For this next round, we decided it made sense for us to go a little deeper into community and to invite those smaller organizations or larger organizations, but folks who were providing those direct services in to talk to us about the needs that they were seeing specifically and think about ways that the Critical Needs Fund could support them. So we're focused on the same areas that the Denver Foundation has prioritized as a part of its strategic plan for the last decade: basic human needs, education, economic opportunity, leadership and equity, and behavioral health. But we're also really looking at organizations that have had a loss of resource as a result of COVID and can describe that loss of resource. And we're curious about where organizations are getting other resources. So what those look like as well. Is a very, very simple application. It doesn't require any attachments. It's really designed to hear from community organizations and to be able to respond to them. And we think that that will do a couple of things. One is that it will allow us to steward the dollars in the Critical Needs Fund in the smartest, best possible way. But it also allows us to pull together, exactly, Chelsea, as you're describing, a list of organizations in various areas and arenas that we can lift up for others who have an interest in investing in a particular area, whether that's immigration or women and children or whatever it may be. So we're really excited about this new route to gain real deep information about what's happening on the ground and to be able to make investments in those spaces.
Great, and we're getting a lot more questions, so thank you for sending those. I forgot to say at the beginning that we reserve the right to respond, I don't know, and we will get back to you. Because information is coming. Oh, there's my dog. There's our glitch, my dog. Information is coming in every day. And so one of the things I wanted to let you know now, and we will wrap up with it, is that we will be following up with a ways to engage piece that we'll be emailing everyone that took part in this. And if we do hit a question that we can't answer, we'll do some research and include that when we send out that piece. So this is a question earlier from Betty. And I think maybe either Desa or Javier might be able to speak to it. She's read a lot about the issue of providing safer sheltering for the homeless population. There's suggestions been such as making hotel rooms available. Have you heard about any of this kind of effort with any of the agencies or local governments or state governments that you're talking to?
I mean, just to start on the local government side, I know that the mayor is making a very strong push to encourage hotels to do exactly that. Where that is right now, I'm not really sure, but I know that the mayor has made it one of his key issues, particularly over the last couple of days. So hopefully with his leadership and then with other nonprofits in the community serving the homeless population, we'll be able to find some of those solutions. For the nonprofit partnership piece of this, I'm going to let Desa weigh in.
Other than to say that the nonprofit organizations that we have worked with, so for example, the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative, the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, a variety of organizations have been really pushing for that as a solution in just the way that you describe, and haven't yet been successful in having that solution really catch on. I did read something, and this is like me reading something on Facebook, but the Mile High Behavioral Health Council posted something about the city of Aurora also taking a look at that. So I think there's push across the metro area to take a look at that as a solution, because there's clearly something that's a significant need.
Okay, so first, I think getting information from various sources, including Facebook right now, is probably okay. I think Chris Cuomo is giving more medical advice to the nation than anybody else right now, outside of maybe Dr. Fauci. So I think that's perfectly okay. And I just wanted to call out that Jay just put a note in the chat that right before this meeting, so none of us, I guess, saw it, the mayor announced that he will have 134 hotel rooms available. So hopefully that's just the start of a wave of making this available to folks in our unsheltered population during this crisis. So thank you, Jay, for letting us know, because I know I hadn't seen that.
Great. Well, we have a question that someone wants to share on their own. That's Bill Schmidt. So Bill, we're going to be taking you off mute and putting the spotlight on you.
Okay, thank you. Earlier this morning, we had a similar meeting like this with the Education Committee at the Denver Foundation. There was a very interesting conversation with Vernon Jones at Faith Bridge about what's going on in his observations. Concerning comment he made, which I've heard expressed by others, is that when we come out of this, philanthropy will never look the same as it did before, and that the lack of preparedness that we find we're confronted with now will have to be planned for in the future. But he also feels there will be a lot of smaller nonprofits who will not survive this and will be extinct at the end. And so that's my observation. The question is, how can we go about trying not to use a shotgun approach to giving and say everybody that shows up at the door gets a small token, as opposed to more of a shotgun approach where we try and target those organizations which will be the survivors and most capable of dealing with this crisis today and in the future?
I'll open it up. Who'd like to take that?
I didn't know if you had to unmute me or if I could. I'm just having trouble with this mute situation, Alyssa, with the moderator. Bill, I think that that's a really, really important question. I hold the same concern that there are going to be organizations that are not going to make it through this. And in some cases, those are really important organizations that need to make it because they're organizations that are serving those most vulnerable populations. And so I think that's part of why, for example, the Denver Foundation in our scan for this next round of Critical Needs Fund is looking at who are those organizations that have access to other resources, because if there's federal dollars coming down that they can access, then that they might not need philanthropic dollars in the same way. It might help preserve them, and those dollars may better go to some of the smaller organizations that wouldn't have resources otherwise. But I think it is really important for us to recognize that there are organizations that might need to consider different options. They, in the same way that in other economic crises, organizations have had to consider things like, I can remember back in 2008 when we started saying the words merger and acquisition out loud, which was nothing that had been said before out loud. That was like a dirty word, but we had to talk about it. We had to talk about sharing space and sharing services. We had to talk about organizations that were duplicating services in ways that they could work together with other organizations. So I think we're going to see those same kinds of conversations happening in the nonprofit sector. And I think as philanthropy, our job is both to look at what organizations are viable and need resources, but also to support those organizations that are going through those different kinds of structuring, which is something that we've seen philanthropy do in other times of crisis.
Javier, did you have something you wanted to add?
I want to speak to Bill's broader point about philanthropy post-COVID. I've been saying now for a few weeks that normal is getting an extreme makeover, and that cuts across everything: society, politics, life in general. But it certainly applies to philanthropy. One of the early things that philanthropy across the board did was to make giving in this moment much more flexible. So you saw everybody switch to general operating grants. Well, that's something that the Denver Foundation sort of does as a matter of course. So why shouldn't that be the new normal post-COVID across the board in philanthropy throughout America? The other thing is, for the Denver Foundation, we, as I mentioned earlier, and as Desa spoke to, have cranked up the RFP process and the grant making process tenfold in terms of speed from what normally would be our course of action. Well, why can't we operate in a more nimble way, in a speedier way, in a less cumbersome way for nonprofits in a post-COVID world? That's something I'm really motivated to think about and explore with our team. So there may be some good that comes out of this exercise as we shift our way of operating. One other thing that I'd like to say to Bill's point is there are limits to what philanthropy can do. And I also want to sort of lightly touch on the question that was asked about medical supplies. For that one, frankly, unless somebody else on the team has an answer, I would say we would have to check with the governor's office and see where they're directing people who want to participate in helping the procurement of medical supplies. And I think we should be doing that in a moment of crisis. But you know what? Let's not let government off the hook. Why weren't we prepared? Why are there so few tests? Why are there so few ventilators across America? So there's only so much philanthropy can do. Congress passed a $2 trillion package 2 weeks ago. Combined, philanthropy throughout America doesn't have that kind of money, that kind of wherewithal. So while philanthropy absolutely needs to step up in moments like this, and we've spent the last 45 minutes talking about just how we're doing it at the Denver Foundation, philanthropy also needs to have a voice and to hold government accountable in times when government has failed.
Well, Javier, you masterfully answered the last two questions at once without even being prompted. So thank you for talking about this concept of the new normal and how the foundation is trying to learn and come out of this period even stronger, more relevant, more resilient, and learning as we go and responding to community. To wrap us up, I'd like to go to Sarah Harrison to talk to you a little bit more about the role of philanthropy responding to COVID.
Thank you, Alyssa, and thanks everybody again for being here. The greatest thing we ever do is something we do for others. And when we do things for others whom we'll never meet, it's even more important. That's what building community is about. And that's what partnering together is about. And we think that's what being part of a community foundation is about, doing things for others, working together. So today's webinar is one way that we try to add value to your experience as philanthropists and as connected community members. And we hope that it's galvanized you even more to engage with your favorite nonprofits and with the local community, and not just for COVID, but certainly for COVID and beyond. We'd really like to ask you to dig deeper and engage with us. Make a personal gift to the Critical Needs Fund. You can give personally, online, or through a donor advised grant. Everything you give is carefully sent out in the process that DESA has described with our grant making experts in the programs department. This is high impact strategic giving, to Bill's point. We also hope you'll share our information about the Critical Needs Fund and the work we're doing with your networks. Again, sometimes people want to help and they don't know how. And this is something that's available to people at all levels. Gifts so far, again, from $25 to $1 million. Remember, engage your nonprofits. If they're operating in the areas DESA cited, basic human needs, economic opportunity, education, leadership and equity, and behavioral health, they should look at our critical needs application, which is posted online. And finally, please continue to take care of yourselves. We need you in the community. We hope you're healthy and safe, and we look forward to partnering with you again. Thank you.
Great, thank you everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. The last question we got was, are you planning continued scheduling Zoom meetings like this? And due to the participation and your great questions, I think the answer is yes. But there's a lot of ways for you to stay connected to us. Don't forget about the Denver Foundation's COVID page. And also, please expect a ways to engage email to be sent in the next few days. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. And just to echo, please be careful. Please protect yourself and be safe. And even though we are apart, it's moments like this that we really do get to work together. So thank you.